right, thanks everyone. Be seated. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
I see a lot of you have your caffeinated beverages with you. No, what's those 5-hour energy drinks though? So, all right, back on the record, Mr. Testament, I'll just remind you that you're still under oath. Mr. Patus, Mr. Cross.
Your Honor, Mr. Cameron, I would like to approach.
Okay.
It's Ms. Close, thank you.
Mr. Patus.
Preliminary matter, we can agree you're not a police officer.
That's correct, sir.
We can agree that you've never been to a police academy.
That's correct.
You've never been trained in investigative techniques by a federal agency or a state police department.
That's correct.
We can agree that you've never been trained in the same regards as a forensic investigator.
That's correct.
We can agree that you have no training as a forensic accountant.
That's correct.
We can agree that you have no training as a forensic tax expert.
That's correct.
We can agree that no one has any obligation to talk to you as a reporter whatsoever.
That's also correct.
We can agree that no one has any obligation to provide you with any documents whatsoever.
I would disagree.
How so?
I believe that the IRS requires nonprofit organizations to turn over copies of their tax returns if requested in writing.
All right, we're going to get to that. You're talking about 990s, for instance.
Yes, sir, I am.
And a 990 is what?
A tax return.
It's a special kind of tax return that businesses and nonprofits have to provide, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you did eventually obtain the 990s in this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
So those were provided to you.
Well, they were provided by the IRS.
You actually had a very contentious fight with Helen McMurray, the USMBA's legal counsel, correct?
I'm not sure what, I would say that there was contentious behavior in that respect at times. I don't know what situation you're referring to.
Well, she accused you of stalking members of the USMBA to the point where you caused physical harm. She accused you of that.
I do recall that.
And she made that accusation to you.
There was a letter from the USMVA that talked about alleged stalking.
Not saying you did it, but she said, stop stalking. Blanca Contreras, Carmika Rubin are two of the examples.
I believe that's correct, yes.
Thank you. And in fact, you had met Carmika Rubin of the USMBA.
I don't recall meeting Carmika Rubin.
You talked to somebody who met her, though.
That's a different question altogether.
It is.
I did talk to someone who met her.
And someone who's not related to the USMBA. In fact, his name would be Paul Tash. No, excuse me, not Paul Tash. Someone from the Tampa Bay Harvest.
Yes.
And you learned in your investigation that the USMBA donated $20,000 to the Tampa Bay Harvest, correct?
I did learn that.
Can I approach Aaron?
Yes.
Mr. Testament, I'm showing what's been marked as Defense Exhibit A. Once you take a look at that document, do you recognize what that is? Sorry, it's an email.
All right.
Do you recognize that document?
It does appear to be a document I'm familiar with.
Okay. How are you familiar with that document?
It appears to be an email involving myself and Helen McMurray.
Okay. Who sent that email?
It bears my name as the sender.
Do you have any doubt that you sent that email?
I do have a recollection of it.
So you have no doubt you sent that email?
I don't think I have any doubt about it.
Okay. What is in paragraph 2, does that confirm that you learned something about the USNBA's donations?
Paragraph 2.
Approach here.
Yes.
Well, you numbered it, number 2.
Oh, you mean paragraph 6?
Paragraph 6, number 2.
Okay. All right, I'm sorry.
What did you learn in that number 6? Paragraph 6, number 2. What did you learn in there?
I'm stating that the United States Navy Veterans has said that that because of our inquiry that there is a legal bill that we should pay of $36,099.91.
So the USNBA is attempting to collect over $36,000 from you, and what's your response to that?
Well, our response was that we didn't raise any, weren't responsible for any bill of legal fees that we should be responsible for.
But you do ask them to forward the bill so you can send it to your legal department?
Yes.
Why don't you just say, we're not paying that?
Objection, relevance.
Yeah, I'll sustain the objection. Next question, please.
Sure. And in paragraph 1 on the same email, you confirm, or item numbered 1 on this email.
Yes.
You confirm the $20,000 donation to the Tampa Bay Harvest.
Yes.
And did you personally investigate and find that the USNBA donated the $20,000?
I talked to the, I believe he was the executive director of that organization, and he did tell me that the organization had received a donation of $20,000.
I want to back up for a second and focus in on why or what initially drew your attention to the USNBA. Isn't it correct that your initial reason for seeking out the USNBA, that you believed that they were making illegal political contributions to various Republican candidates?
No, sir, it's not.
It's not true that 3 days after your meeting with Mr. Thompson that you described on the side of the road, that you published personally an article describing the white contribution as being illegal in nature?
Well, that's one donation. You said donations to Republicans.
So that donation, you published a story saying it was illegal.
I believe I said that in the manner in which it was sent, it did not comply with Florida law.
Prosecution was never brought on that donation, was it?
Not to my knowledge.
I want to now focus too on your conflict or your correspondence with the USNBA's legal counsel, Helen McMurray. Isn't it true the crux of your conversation with her was about whether or not the USNBA could make political donations as a IRS 501c19 organization versus a 501c3 organization?
I believe we had conversations in that respect.
In fact, it became so contentious that the USNBA demanded that the group that owns the paper, your paper, turn over their documents, their IRS documents.
That's true.
And is that the Pointer Group? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
The Pointer Institute,
Okay, and they're a 501c3 organization, right?
yes.
And they're very politically active. They have lots of political donations.
I don't have personal knowledge.
Okay, but that was part of the dispute between the USNBA Council and yourself, was over the Pointer Group's donations versus the USNBA's donations.
Well, I recall that the USNVA, acting through Ms. McMurray, the General Counsel, at some point complained that they couldn't get the tax returns for the Pointer Institute. And I recall that within a day or so, I personally called the executive director of the Pointer Institute and asked them to make the tax returns available to the USNVA if they had not already done so.
Now, on direct examination, the prosecutor asked you questions regarding your experiences with the military and obtaining military records. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
How many times have you recalled, or how many times in your career do you recall requesting some of these military records?
I think once,
Once before?
yes.
All right. Any idea why an individual's fingerprints wouldn't be in their military file?
I don't know.
Okay, did you obtain the military records here that relate to Mr. Cody?
I did not. I can tell you that when it became known that Mr. Thompson was identified as Mr. Cody, I had retired and was no longer in journalism.
Why did you decide to suddenly retire after the story was published?
Objection, relevance.
I'll give you a little latitude. Let me answer.
I retired the month I turned 62, which enabled me to take early Social Security, and I had a desire to spend more time with my son, who is in high school.
So, more time with the family and early Social Security is why you retired.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, tell me about an article you wrote, and it's connected to this case, called The Trail of Money, which used and borrows from something that happened to Native Americans, the Trail of Tears. Tell me about that article. You wrote an article called The Trail of Money, correct?
This goes back some years. I am familiar with the...
Right, you got sued.
Objection, Your Honor. The witness was trying to answer the question and being cut off.
Sure. So, first of all, gentlemen, I appreciate just hearing the word objection. And if I need any follow-up, I'll make a request for at that point in time. So, Mr. Patus, you need to allow Mr. Chesterman to answer his question.
Absolutely, Your Honor.
Did you complete your answer, Mr. Chesterman?
Yes, sir.
Ask your next question, please. No, I'm sorry, you had not completed your answer.
I think I had not.
Please continue.
I co-wrote a series of stories on the Seminole Tribe of Florida, and one of those was entitled The Trail of Money.
And you can agree with me that that title borrowed from one of the most terrific events ever to happen to Native Americans in our country, the Trail of Tears.
No, sir, I can't.
You're not familiar with what the Trail of Tears is?
I'm familiar with the Trail of Tears.
What is it?
It's when the Seminoles were marched to the reservation by the U.S. government following the Seminole Wars.
Okay. So you, in order to sell a paper, used the title Trail of Money to capitalize on that hardship.
Objection.
Yeah, I'll sustain the objection. Ask your next question, please.
That's not the only time that an individual or a group of individuals has sued you for such titles, is it?
Objection, relevance.
Yeah, why don't we approach sidebar, please? sustain the objection. Ask your next question, please.
Who is Private Kelly, and why did your newspaper focus on running a series of articles around the same time as this, or newspaper issues about his service in Iraq?
I'm not, I can't recall the stories on Private Kelly you refer to.
Now, when was your first contact with the police based upon what you had learned?
Based upon what I'd learned.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've been testifying that you found a major scam and a major fraudulent enterprise happening. When's the first time you called the cops?
I can't recall the date, but I can tell you that we made one request for any records that they had, incident reports, etc., concerning Commander Bobby Thompson and or the U.S. Navy veterans. I don't recall the date we asked for it.
So the answer to the question was you don't remember when?
I don't remember the date, no sir.
Did you ever make a police report?
No sir.
Did you ever call the IRS or the federal government and say, I have a National Veterans Association that's ripping off millions of people?
No sir.
Who's your source in this case? Who tipped you off to this?
I had no one tipped me off to this, and I had no confidential source of any type that led me to Mr. Thompson, the U.S. NVA.
Why'd you fight so hard to avoid revealing your source in this case? That's
Objection, Your Honor.
Yeah, and we'll sustain the objection.
Now, you've mentioned this program called LexisNexis, correct?
Yes sir.
Now, I use LexisNexis myself. Is it your position, and are you trying to get this jury to believe that you can type Joe Patatus into LexisNexis and it's going to produce my address, my phone number, my social security number?
I couldn't say if that's true or not.
All right, how about Brian Reagan? You type Brian Reagan into LexisNexis, is it going to produce a social security number, any identification whatsoever?
I don't know.
Well, did you do it in this case?
Type Brian Reagan into it.
Yeah.
The LexisNexis search was handled by my colleague, head researcher John Martin.
Okay, how about, did you type Richard Barbery, spelled B-A-R-B-E-R-R-Y, into your LexisNexis program to see if he exists?
The LexisNexis search was handled by my colleague John Martin, researcher.
Sorry for interrupting you. How about Charles Thompson?
The LexisNexis search was handled by my colleague John Martin.
Jack Nimitz?
Objection, Your Honor.
All the LexisNexis searches were handled by John Martin, my colleague.
So you have no personal knowledge as to the results. You didn't do that search yourself.
It's true, I did not do that search myself.
So what you're relying upon is hearsay to form your
Objection,
opinion.
legal.
I'll overrule the objection.
You're relying upon hearsay to form your opinion.
If you're asking me, am I relying on my colleague who did the search to tell what he found in the search? That is correct.
You didn't do the search yourself.
No, sir, I did not.
Did you go to the 1725 Connecticut Avenue address that's listed on the top of the website?
No, I did not personally go there.
And the address that you mentioned before, which is on their letterhead, 1718 M Street, Northwest 275, Washington, D.C. Did you go there?
I did not personally go there.
As you can agree with me, there are two different addresses. One is a mailbox, and the Connecticut address is a real office. But you didn't go there.
Not having been there, I don't know that.
So you have, again, no personal knowledge as to whether or not the 1725 Connecticut address even exists. You never went.
I guess that's correct.
Now, Tom O'Daniel, He's a board member of the USNDA, correct? Or was?
From time to time,
Real person?
real person, as far as I know. I talked to him.
You talked to him personally?
Yes, I did.
Isn't that somebody in Mr. Thompson's head? He's a real person.
Yes, he's a person.
Okay, how about Blanca Contreras?
Well, she's a real person, and she's here in Cuyahoga County.
All right. You spoke to her?
I do not believe I ever spoke to her.
How about,
Not for lack of trying.
I apologize for interrupting you again. How about Sam Wright?
I did talk to Samuel Ray.
You a real person?
Yes,
Active in the USNDA?
yes,
Now, you can agree with me that Mr. Wright, he provided legal services for veterans on behalf of the USNDA.
yes, he did.
And that's a legitimate, you would agree with me, that's a legitimate function of the USNDA?
Mr. Wright, my recollection of Mr. Wright's services to veterans was that he did that sort of thing outside the realm of being special counsel to USNVA. He was a labor lawyer with a specialty in veterans affairs, and worked, according to his biography, quite diligently throughout his career as both a Navy captain and a lawyer for veterans' rights.
I want to make sure I get all the people that you talked to. You have Tom O'Daniel, correct?
I did talk to him.
Okay. Normally I have you get down and do this, but I don't want to have do that. Sam Wright, correct?
I talked to Sam Wright.
All right. You talked to Carmika Rubin? I forget if I already asked that.
I don't recall talking to Carmika Rubin.
Do you have any doubt that Carmika Rubin is a real person?
I don't.
So she's real.
Yes.
What was her function?
Miss Rubin is a lawyer who at one time represented herself to be, I believe, executive director for the United States Navy Veterans. And I recall that we wrote a letter to Ms. McMurray to ask about her role with the group, and within a short period of time she became in-house or special counsel to the USNVA.
And of course, put a name up here we already know, Bobby Thompson. All right. So Mr. O'Daniel, he was a board member, correct? You said on again, off again?
Mr. O'Daniel, to my knowledge and recollection, was never listed on the USNVA website as a director, but in the period toward when Mr. Thompson disappeared, he was one of about 3 board members that the USNVA lawyers could find when they attempted to convene a meeting.
Sure.
So it seemed that he was made a board member at some point very late in the history of the USNVA.
Okay, and before that, Mr. O'Daniel, what he was doing was he was doing donations. In the sense of buying cars and buying basically car donations with the USNVA. You learned that, right?
So he said.
Any reason to doubt him?
Well, I don't have any personal knowledge that he got any vehicles for salvage or sale. I do believe we were able to track his purchase of one, seems to me it was a Ford truck of some sort that came to be titled by the USNVA or its members.
Right, and that same truck was, I believe, a red colored truck was donated then to a soldier, or a former soldier.
Well, a soldier that was a relative of one of the Mr. Thompson's assistants.
Sure. And under a 501c19 organization, you're allowed to do that. Correct?
I think he can donate to lots of things.
Sure.
So yes.
Now, with Sam Wright, you mentioned that he was special counsel
Yes.
And he also provided legal counsel for vets, and even some active duty service members, as you described there on Crossbar.
I believe that's correct.
And are you aware that he was paid $2,500 a month?
I am not aware of that.
Yeah, I will put it up there. Now, Carmika Rubin, she started off as a volunteer, became an officer, and then became special counsel. Is that your understanding?
One more time, volunteer.
Well, you tell me, what's your understanding of her?
I think she, I mean, I don't know if she was a volunteer or not, but I do think she served as some sort of assistant to Mr. Thompson in some sort of official capacity, and then became special counsel, or perhaps even in-house counsel.
Erickson, John Erickson, you know who that is?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Are you aware that Mr. Erickson, strike that, are you aware of any other lawyers who provided services for veterans as part of their work with the USMDA?
I don't recall any.
How much time did you spend looking into the charitable donations that the USMDA made?
Well, over the course of an 8-month inquiry, we spent a good amount of time. It's hard, I can't say I quantified it at the time, but we did spend a great deal of time trying to figure out the expenses and to validate the expenses of the USMVA. We, you know, in particular, we're trying to learn if lots of money was going to soldiers overseas,
Sure.
for instance.
All right, what donations did you find?
To soldiers overseas?
No, I mean in general from the USMDA.
Well, there was the local radio station got a several $1,000 grant, the public radio station. The USO got a small, relatively small grant. The Harvest group received the $20,000 that you previously alluded to. I want to be careful about donations I personally verified versus those that were claimed, and I think those are the ones that I personally verified.
Okay. Did you take the time to, well, let's talk about political donations. What political donations are you aware of?
Well, again, we've published a extensive list of donations from the USMVA and from NAVPAC, the PAC that was set up as an arm of the USMVA, and they went. You know, there were a number of them. I don't know the quantitative number, nor do I recall the quantitative dollar amount.
Okay, well, how about Mike DeWine? Did Mike DeWine receive a political donation?
Yes, Mr. DeWine did.
Okay. How about Betty Montgomery?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Well, did you, because I thought you indicated you verified only a handful of donations that were made.
Well, he was talking about donations, then he, in my view, began a different category of political contributions.
Well, let me ask, did you verify these donations that you're speaking about here personally?
By the official reporting through the Federal Election Commission or the state supervisors of election, yes.
All right, then overruled, you may inquire.
Ms. Montgomery from Ohio, did you confirm that she received a political donation?
Yes.
My handwriting's horrible, so I apologize. How about Senator Voinovich? Did you receive a political donation?
I believe that's one of the 2 or 3 dozen names of politicians that did.
How about this? She said 2 to 3 dozen.
I'm giving you a ballpark.
You have to go with what you can remember.
The St. Petersburg Times has published a fairly complete list of those donations.
What was the dollar figure associated with all these political donations that were made?
I don't have that at hand. I'm sorry, I don't recall.
Was it more than $100,000?
Yes, I believe it was.
More than $200,000?
I think it was.
More than $300,000?
I believe it was.
Now, did you ever, in the course of what you described as being your investigation, did you ever obtain a copy of the script that the telemarketers were supposed to read to potential donors?
No.
Did you ever obtain, again, in the course of your investigation, did you ever obtain a copy of the disclaimer that the potential donors were sent?
No.
Did you ever speak to a potential donor?
My wife was called by a fundraiser asking for money from the U.S. Navy Veterans Association, and I speak to her every day.
No. Did she donate?
She did not.
Okay. Did you ever speak to somebody who made a donation?
I believe I did.
What's her name?
I know I talked to people who were solicited, and I at this moment I can't recall the names of the people that received those telemarketing calls.
How did you get in touch with the people who allegedly made these donations or who were solicited?
In general, they called me.
Because of the article that you wrote?
That's correct.
Now, you took that article up and you tried to get a Pulitzer for that article, correct?
I don't have anything to do with prize getting. That's among the top editors at the newspaper.
Sure. Now, when you approached my client on the street, your testimony is, and what you want the jury to believe is you just happened to be there at the right time and just happened to hear the ending of a phone conversation where he identified himself as send it to United States Veterans Association, Commander Thompson. You were just there at the right place and the right time?
Yes, sir, I was.
You weren't there trying to accuse him of something else?
Objection made.
Yeah, I'll sustain the objection.
You weren't there accusing him of being involved in illegal Indian gambling, going back to the Trail of Money article?
No, sir, I wasn't.
And again, you're not a police officer.
No, sir, I'm not.
You had no reason or no obligation to speak to at all?
None whatsoever.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Let's look at this board up here for a second. Got the name Tom O'Daniel up there. You see where that's at?
Yes, sir.
Now, he stated, in response to the questions, that Mr. O'Daniel, well, he was a board member at some point in time. Is that correct?
That's what I was told.
In your research, did you identify that Tom O'Daniel was one of the 2 people that became a board member just days before the meeting in New York City in January, in June of 2010?
In the way I can answer the question, I'm not I don't know the date of the meeting in New York, but I do know that after Mr. Thompson cleared out of his duplex and left Tampa, Mr. O'Daniel was appointed at some point after that.
So Mr. O'Daniel did not become a board member until Bobby Thompson basically disappears, correct?
That's correct. That's my understanding.
Now we look at, well, he ran some donations. What he ran, that was in the state of Florida, correct?
I believe the USO was out of, I don't believe they're Florida based, they're based somewhere else, but the Harvest Group, is this?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm asking about Tom O'Daniels and this
Oh,
donation.
yes, in the state of Florida.
And I apologize. The defendant, when he was asking you questions just a few moments ago, he made a statement that, well, he ran a vehicle, he was doing vehicle donations or something, correct?
Yes, sir.
And were you aware in your research, when you're talking about this vehicle donation program, that what it was is he was hired by the defendant to run a vehicle donation program, correct?
I don't know, I don't have personal knowledge of a contractual arrangement between the two.
Okay. But he was not an employee of the, there were no employees for the United States Navy Veterans Association.
The Navy veterans said they had no employees, only volunteers.
Okay. Now we'll go to Sam Wright, because we heard about him. And the defense counsel, when he's asking questions, sort of said, oh, well, he provided legal counsel to vets. Did you find any veterans that identified that Sam Wright had given them legal counsel as a member of the USNVA, that that's what he was there doing? Did you find any vets that told you that?
I don't recall any.
Okay. So Sam Wright, the term up here is special counsel. He was hired the same as the general counsel, Ms. McMurray. He was hired by the defendant to be a special counsel for the USNVA, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he wasn't a member of the USNVA, was he?
I don't have knowledge that he was.
Let's take his name off this thing. So he was, again, Sam Wright, just an employee. Now let's go to Carmika Rubin. Now Carmika Rubin, you identified at one point she was a volunteer, and then her status changed. Is that correct?
She had some title like executive director when she approached the Harvest Group about a donation. Shortly thereafter, her title changed and she became special or in-house counsel.
So again, there were no employees for the USNVA, correct?
Well, that's what they represented on their website.
That's what they represented to the IRS in all their documentation on their 990s.
Indeed.
They had absolutely no employees.
That's correct.
So Carmika Rubin wasn't an employee of the organization, the USNVA, correct?
That would seem to be correct.
That would mean when she's hired as a special counsel, the special counsel is not considered to be an employee of the organization.
Well,
Because
they said no one was paid. That it was all volunteer labor.
Okay, so if she's receiving any kind of pay, then as a special counsel, she's another contract employee. She was hired to be a lawyer for the, as you stated, an in-house counsel, right?
Yes, sir.
A real person, but somebody he hired. So let's go. Well, we know Bobby Thompson, correct? The director.
Well, we know.
That there was a person, the individual you identified as Bobby Thompson,
Yes, sir.
who was the director. Now, $300,000 in political donations, approximately, as best you can recall, correct?
It may have been more or less, and I'm sorry, we have published a complete list in our own newspaper of all of them that we could find.
Did you find any evidence? Did you find any documentation that said a single dollar of any of these political donations came out of any account that held money that had been donated from the state of Ohio?
I have no way of making that connection now.
Now, we've got NAVPAC, correct?
Yes, sir.
That's the defendant who came up with NAVPAC.
Yes, sir.
Now, what was your understanding of what NAVPAC was?
NAVPAC, I found in the records of the Federal Election Commission and it was a duly organized political action committee, PAC, that made contributions to politicians, and the only name connected on those records with establishing NAVPAC was Bobby Thompson.
So NAVPAC was something separate and apart from the USNVA, is that correct?
That is correct.
Well, when you had that meeting with the defendant
Yes.
in front of the duplex in August of 2009, did you have any part of that conversation with him? Did it involve whether or not the USNVA, not NAVPAC, a separate organization, whether the USNVA was donating money, making any political contributions?
Yes.
What did the defendant tell you?
Well, I had asked about what was shown on a county commission candidate, Kevin White's campaign report, as a $500 contribution from the USNVA. I went to Mr. Thompson's duplex to ask him about that check. Honestly, Kevin White was what was interesting to me at that point, because Mr. White, I had received a call from a man by the name of Matthew Cox, who was in prison, and said that he had offered a bribe to Kevin White. So I was working on stories about Kevin White, and I learned that Mr. White did not have the long and glorious Navy career that he'd claimed in political campaigns. In obtaining his discharge papers, I learned that Mr. White actually had gone into the Navy at 17 and had come out of the Navy a few weeks later, I think, several weeks later. So he'd barely been in the Navy and then was mustered out at age 17. And I thought that I should go see the USNVA initially to say to them, did you know about the real career in the Navy of Kevin White when you wrote them the check? That was my initial intention of going to see Mr. Thompson and asking about the contribution.
Okay, so when you asked him about the USNVA making political contributions,
Yes.
in general, did he make a statement about whether the USNVA made?
Well, he said they did not. And he said the one that I'm referring to must have been put down in the campaign report incorrectly.
So the defendant told you, if I understand, when you asked him about whether the USNVA made political contributions, he told you flat out that the USNVA did not make political contributions.
I think
Is that correct?
I think he may have used just about those words.
So when we're looking at $300,000 in political contributions, there's nothing saying that came from the USNVA, that it came from NAVPAC. Is that correct?
I don't know where the money came from in either case.
Okay. Now, we've got a couple of contributions. Now, when we're talking about public radio, the defendant asked some questions about some money, maybe a couple $1,000, $20,000 or something like that. Did you find that approximately $3 million was donated to public radio by the defendant out of accounts that held Ohio money?
No, sir.
No? Well, did you find that the defendant donated, when we're talking about the money that came out of Ohio accounts, money that had been donated from the state of Ohio, did you find that any money that was donated to this USO that's identified on here, did that add up to $3 million?
No, sir, did not.
Well, now, the defendant made a point of asking about the harvester, and there was a check for $20,000 at some point.
Yes,
Now, do you still have that in front of you, that exhibit?
I do not.
Can I have that exhibit? Mr. Pavitus, where is it?
Next.
Okay. Now, I'd like you to look at that exhibit. Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. I should have asked for permission. I apologize. Defense Exhibit A, I'd like you to look at that again. Does that identify when that donation was made to the Harvest Group?
Well, I think based on the date of the email here, that it is in or about February of 2010.
So February of 2010. And you published your article in March of 2010, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you met the defendant in front of his duplex in August of 2010 and started asking him questions, correct? Or 2009, I'm
yes,
sorry.
sir. Yes, sir.
So before this donation was made. Now, the donation, according to this email, was approximately $20,000.
Yes, sir.
Did you find any documentation that that $20,000 somehow ballooned or was the culmination of like almost $3 million that was donated to the Harvest Group?
To my knowledge, it was a single $20,000 contribution.
So with what you have, it's a one-time $20,000 after you met him and confronted him outside his duplex.
Yes, sir.
Well now, between the public radio, the USO, and this Harvest Group, well, we know this was about $20,000 according to email, but let's put them all three together. Does that add up to almost $3 million in donations?
No, sir, it doesn't.
No? Now we have some politicians and donations. Well, now you told me a little bit ago that the donations, there was no information, that the defendant specifically told you the USNVA didn't make any political contributions, correct? So the
Yes, sir.
USNVA did not make any donation to Mr. DeWine, did it? Did it?
I can't say I know where the money came from that went to Mr. DeWine.
But according to what the defendant told you,
It did not
USNVA
come-
didn't make any political donations.
It did not come, according to what he said, it did not come from the USNVA.
So that would apply to Ms. Montgomery as well, correct?
Correct.
And that would apply to Mr. Voinovich, correct?
Correct.
So all these political donations that we just heard about have nothing to do, there's absolutely no documentation whatsoever that when the defendant, should he have given money to them, that any of that money came out of a single account that held Ohio money, correct?
I can't say where the money came from.
Now, we also heard that Blanca Contreras is a real person, right?
Yes.
Blanca Contreras, did you find any documentation that states that Blanca Contreras was a military veteran?
I did not.
Did you find any documentation that ever said that Blanca Contreras was actually a member of what was called the USNVA?
The Contreras family, at some point, she and her daughter did at some point sign documents. This is after Mr. Thompson had left Tampa, on renewals of state chapters paperwork that needed to be renewed on an annual basis.
So she, after the defendant took off and disappeared, Blanca Contreras then signed various registration papers, as you're stating, correct?
That's correct.
And she signed them, I guess, as a treasurer?
Some officer. It seems to me that there were a couple of 3 states involved with this paperwork, and that the officers differed from state to state.
So until the defendant took off in June of 2010, there was nothing stating that Blanca Contreras necessarily was, well, an officer or director is not the same thing as a member, correct?
I don't believe it is.
Yeah, so you could be a member, or you could be an officer or director, or you could be an officer or director that is a member.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, and while we're talking about Blanca Contreras, I recall a question. Do you recall the question from the defense counsel about the truck? The
Yes.
pickup truck, I guess
Yes.
it was. Now, with this pickup truck, it was stated that, well, it was given to a veteran, right?
That, it was stated that.
And you stated it was a son of somebody.
Yes, sir.
It was the son of Blanca Contreras.
That's my understanding.
And it was given to Blanca Contreras' son after the defendant took off, correct?
Yes, sir.
We heard about the Pointer Group. Do you remember that line of questions?
Yes,
Am
I
I
do.
saying that right, the Pointer Group?
Pointer Institute.
Of the Pointer Institute. Now, there was questions about, well, that the defendant, as Bobby Thompson, there was this dispute whether he was going to provide the financial records, things like the 990s to the newspaper, to your paper in response to your request for those documents, correct?
Yes, sir.
And if I understand it correctly, is it that you guys made the request, you guys being the paper, I apologize. The paper made the request to the USNVA and said, we want your 990s.
Yes, sir.
And then the retort from the USNVA was, well, look, Pointer Institute, you give us your 990s. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
Well, now after the defense counsel asked you that, the question sort of ended, because I'm not clear in that after they demanded the records, did the Pointer Institute, your newspaper, provide those records?
Sir, my recollection is that I took care of that personally myself.
So the records were provided?
Yes, sir.
Well, now, since the Pointer Institute went on and provided those records, did the defendant, Bobby Thompson, and the USNVA reciprocate then and say, well, okay, you guys provided us ours, yours, here's ours?
No, sir. In particular, to my way of thinking as a reporter, a very critical document, the application for tax exemption. We did not receive, and we had to make special order of that through the IRS. And we did receive it through the IRS.
So even the application, well, now, do you recall who signed that application for the IRS? Do you recall the name on that?
You mean
For the
IRS official?
No, I'm sorry. I apologize. The person from the USNVA, what was the name?
Well, I think it was Bobby Thompson, although there was a founding member or two that were listed as well. Mr. I want to say Marbury.
Could it have been a Brian Reagan's name on that? Could that have been one of the names?
I don't recall.
Okay, that's fair. That's a long time ago.
Yes, sir, it was.
That's fine. So they wouldn't even provide the copy of the application that they had made for this C-19 or tax status from the IRS.
That's correct.
And you did get it, but you had to go to the IRS to get it.
Yes, sir.
Now, the defense counsel asked you that you had requested military records, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you know whether or not there was a question about fingerprints? Do you know whether back in the 50s and 60s and 70s that when a person went in to the United States Army, did they take fingerprints in the Army?
I really don't know.
He asked you also in relation to the military records about, you didn't request, recall this, you didn't request John Donald Cody's military records, correct?
No, we did not.
Well, now, when you were requesting the records, you requested, as I recall, please correct this, you requested the military records for the defendant under the name that you knew him as, Bobby Thompson, correct?
That's correct.
Did you know at the time you made these requests to the POW network, did you know that his real name was John Donald Cody?
I had no knowledge whatsoever.
Well, did you know that the defendant had been in the Army for a period of time and then transferred from active duty after a short stint on active duty to the Army Reserves? Did you know that?
No, sir, I did not.
Now, is your understanding that if somebody has, when you're looking at these military records, that if you serve in some place in a combat zone, let's just say you serve in a place in our history in Vietnam, would that not be identified in your military record somewhere?
I have seen limited records, military records, and I believe the theater in which you serve is part of the record.
So they do include in there where you serve overseas. They put it into your record.
I believe that's correct.
And if you receive any kind of award or decoration, something like a Purple Heart or some kind of combat decoration, that would be included in the awards and decorations section of your records,
Yes,
correct?
sir. I believe that's correct.
And specifically, are you familiar with a document called a DD-214?
Is that a discharge document?
You're
Discharge
familiar with
papers?
it?
Yes,
It's a
sir.
discharge document. On that discharge document,
Yes, sir.
that has a specific place for what you're talking about, as you recall. Is that correct? That it says about foreign campaigns or things like that,
Yes.
correct? And it has a spot on there specifically that identifies where you've received awards and decorations, correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
But at the time you were doing your story, you had no idea that the defendant was John Donald Cody.
None whatsoever.
So it would have been impossible for you, you would have had no reason to request.
None whatsoever.
At the moment, Your Honor?
Certainly.
Thank you. There were some questions about that as you wrote your story, I guess you were doing your research on the USNBA and the defendant under the name of Bobby Thompson. And the defense counsel made a point of asking you, well, you didn't go to the police department and report that this was a scam, correct? You remember that?
I do recall that.
And he said that you didn't go and report that the defendant had stolen the identity of Bobby Thompson, did you?
No, sir, we did not.
Now, when you published your articles, what happened as far as the states like New Mexico or Ohio?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
Several states, and New Mexico was the first, began their own inquiry into the, shall we say, the missing officers. We had published that we could not find any of the officers of the state chapter in New Mexico. The Assistant Attorney General in New Mexico, whose father had been a Navy commander, she said, undertook an inquiry and sought to find, open an investigation.
So while you did not make a police report, the ramification of you writing these articles that raised questions about the fact that the USNBA did not really exist was the fact that states woke up and started doing their own inquiries, correct?
That is correct.
Here we are in this case. Correct?
In Ohio, certainly.
When you write an article, when you write a story, would you classify yourself as an investigative reporter?
Yes, sir. I was until 2.5 years ago.
Oh, well, I apologize. You're retired. When you were not retired and you were an investigative reporter, and you would write these stories, or you'd research these stories, is it commonplace for an investigative reporter to, before they publish their story, to go and make a police report that they think they've uncovered a crime?
We're in the business of getting stuff out. In the case of Mexico, Ohio, Florida, attorneys general read it and reacted.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Any recross?
Briefly, Your Honor, but if I may have just one moment.
Sure.
First, going back over here, you on cross-examination had said NAVPAC. I think you called it a arm of the USMDA.
I believe I did say that.
Is that an accurate description? Is NAVPAC an arm of the USMDA? Were you mistaken?
Well, certainly created by the same person.
So they were really one and the same?
They certainly operated out of the same address.
So they were one and the same?
I'm not saying that.
Asked and answered.
Yeah. Ask your next question, please.
So they were, the money being used for both was the same?
Objection.
If he can answer if he knows.
I don't know.
What was your answer? Now, you testified that, do you have any doubt political donations were made?
Objection. Asked and answered.
Overruled.
Do you have any doubt political donations were made?
By
By either USMDA or NAVPAC?
state and federal records state that contributions were made, and to the extent that those records are valid, I believe that is true.
And I think you used the term on redirect that it was duly organized, that NAVPAC was duly organized according to federal law.
Well, the IRS thought so at the time. They gave them tax exemption.
IRS said this is okay, right?
Yes, they did.
All right, so IRS gave the NAVPAC a big check mark.
Objection, Your Honor. Move to strike.
I'll withdraw it.
All right, gentlemen, ask your next question, please.
Thank you. Now, are you aware in your investigative reporting, well, I'll strike that too, I'm sorry. First, we can agree, the USMDA as an organization, however you want to characterize what was going on behind the scenes, the USMDA was a national organization.
Could you define national organization?
That's fair enough, in the sense that it's operating in more than one state at a time.
Yes.
It, again, we have disagreement here, but it's got a national board of directors, and then it has in each individual state, at least on paper, has directors for the separate states.
Certainly on paper it does.
I know we disagree about this. So you'd agree with me, there's a national level, and then there's a state level layer.
Yes.
Okay. Now, did you ever talk to, you're talking about the money coming in now. Do you have any idea where the Ohio money went at all?
No, I don't.
How about the Florida money? Where'd the Florida money go?
You mean money raised in
Yeah.
from Floridians?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you have, or are you aware through your investigation, are you aware of any law that says money raised in Ohio has to be used in Ohio?
No, sir, I'm not.
How about in Florida? Any law that says money raised in Florida has to be used in Florida?
No, sir, I'm not.
Now, if that was the case, a group like, say, the Red Cross, if they raise money in Ohio, they have to use it just in Ohio if you use that line of thought. That's kind of silly, right? It doesn't make sense that a national organization would have to do that.
I wouldn't want to classify it as silly or not silly.
You have no knowledge of any such rule or any such law that says money raised in Ohio has to be used in Ohio.
I do not.
Are you aware that the money was withdrawn from Ohio and Florida bank accounts into a national central bank account and commingled?
I do not have that knowledge, no.
Did you ever look in to see if that's what happened?
Bank records where the answer that you are talking about might be revealed are beyond the newspaper's legal capacity to inquire into.
Okay.
You can't call a bank and ask them to send the records over.
You mean they won't do that?
I wish.
Now, you mentioned, I know a lot of this got raised, but Sam Wright, do you have any doubt he was serving as special counsel for the USMDA?
I think he probably was. I don't have any. He said he was.
Okay. Now, if he's getting paid by the USMDA, is there anything about that strikes you as illegal or fraudulent?
Objection.
Yeah, sustained.
Well, Mr. Camaro asked you whether or not the USMDA had any employees. And I think you responded by saying it was all volunteer labor. Is that correct?
I believe I said that the USMVA, through its website, represented that that was the case.
What? So is it fair to say you were getting a lot of your information off of the website?
Quite a lot.
When was the first time you looked at that website?
The day after I first met Mr. Thompson.
Which was?
The day I met Mr. Thompson, I think.
How many times did you go back to that? Or first, did you know a date that it had been updated? When was the last time that website had been updated?
I don't have that knowledge.
Okay. When you looked at the website, you didn't note that it had been updated, say, a month prior, a year prior, or 2 years prior?
We became aware of changes that were being made to the website, and we began to archive the various versions of the website to try to keep track of what was going on. But as I sit here, I can't give you a particular date that I'm aware of that happened.
So at the time you first, again, my question was, at the time you first saw the website, you have no idea how current it was?
No, sir, I don't.
And in fact, when you looked at the website, it had, did it look like a very modern website to you?
It never did.
Never looked like a modern website to you?
No, sir.
Looked like something straight out of the 90s? Maybe even 80s?
It was not as modern as many websites could be and are.
So again, the information that you relied upon, you have no idea when it was dated?
No, sir, I don't.
No further questions, thank you.
All right, you may step down. You had something further?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you step down. Ladies and gentlemen, while we take our afternoon recess, I'll again remind you not to discuss this case nor permit it to be discussed in your presence. Don't begin to form or express an opinion until the case is submitted to you. And let's endeavor to maybe take, we'll do our usual 5, maybe 10-minute, which most times turns into a 15-minute recess. But we'll get back at that point in time. So all rise for the jury, please.
Just leave your book on the chair.
Ma'am, would you be good if you kick that stop out the door once you go past it? Thank you.
You're welcome.
we can be up. And gentlemen, I appreciate your respect for protocol, but I don't need to be asked for your, or you don't need to ask me for your permission to approach every time. So I
It's a
appreciate
hard
it.
habit to break, Your Honor.
And I understand, I'm just telling you for my sake, you don't need to. This isn't federal court, so. All right, everybody, let's do 5 or, well, 10 probably.
Thank you. That's it. Yes, it is. All right. Wait a minute. Yeah, Nestor? Go right ahead. You are an amazing individual. You're just amazing you were able to find her.
Really? Not yet. How about you? You having fun?
Yeah, and then we can turn this thing back on.
Yeah, tons. Which one? Tons of fun.
Fire her.
Sorry to make it Friday. I was working on something.
I guess well, that's the original one.
What they had. Oh, I know, so did everyone. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, like it's small. So that's why I didn't come on. I know how it felt. You know, and I wasn't trying to always. I said, oh, this is so nice. Like I told people you never see, and I'm like, I got one man. And it was funny because I never said you can't go to this. So we stopped. And you're right, I had a lot of stuff in the office. I never could finish. And I stayed till like 6. Anyway, this was coming in the night. I was supposed to get down. People get mad at me if I'm getting, stuff I have to get done. And you're done. So yeah, no, we're good.
All right.
How you doing?
Good, how about you? Good.
get it right.
No.
It's always too cold, too hot.
Yeah, slide this thing.
Good old beavers.
Yeah, it's gotta be down here to the lines.
Did you get anything?
Yeah, well, I take some of these out, and my cousin brought it.
Okay, that's,
But I'm like,
I need something to keep these wires.
Major highways for 2 weeks. I was like,
Over that way?
makes sense.
oh, I see. Let's see this. Oh, good Lord, it's always. Well, you know. If it goes like this, it goes like this, it goes like this. There we go.
There.
Online, they're like, oh, yeah.
Nothing ever lines up with you.
2016.
Now, we need like a piece of tape. Hey, Ron, give a couple pieces of tape. I just want to take this out of the way.
Yeah, let me get some masking
You
tape.
see the,
Hey, he wanted to use that cart.
not right now.
Thanks, be seated. Stay and call next witness.
Teresa Griner.
Ma'am, come on up. If you'd be kind enough to raise your right hand, please. You solemnly swear that you will testify to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. In this case, now in hearing, as you shall answer unto God.
I do.
All right, have a seat. The chair doesn't slide up or back, but the microphone does go up and down, so you can get it out of your face if you need to. And Mr. Morrow, your witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, would you state your full name and spell your last name for the court reporter?
Teresa Griner, Greiner.
And are you currently employed?
Yes, I am.
Who do you work for?
Tampa Police Department,
And what's your position with the Tampa PD?
police officer,
How long have you been with the Tampa Police Department?
23 years.
What were your assigned duties with the Tampa PD in February of 2008?
A uniformed patrol officer.
Now, in your capacity as a uniformed patrol officer, did you become familiar with a form of documentation called a street check or a field interview?
Yes, I did.
What is that documentation used for?
To document instances of suspicious persons or suspicious behaviors.
Now, is it a standard procedure of your department to fill out a street check or a field interview report where there is that suspicious activity you respond to?
Yes,
And when would that street check or field interview be prepared?
immediately.
Now, are those street checks or field interview reports retained by your department in the regular course of business?
Yes,
Now, I'd like to direct your attention to February 21st of 2008. Did you respond to a call concerning a suspicious behavior in a Wachovia bank located on 100 Ashley Drive, south in Tampa, Florida?
yes, I did.
Was a street check or field interview prepared in response or in accordance with your standard procedures for your department concerning your response to that report of suspicious activity?
Yes,
And did you have an opportunity to review that street check or field interview concerning your response to the report of suspicious activity prior to testifying here today?
yes.
Now, in general, what was the reported suspicious activity at the Wachovia Bank in February 21st of 2008?
Persons in line at the ATM were concerned because there was a subject at the ATM for a long period of time, repeatedly trying to use different ATM cards.
Approximately, what was the identification as to how many cards there were, as you recall?
I just recall a stack of cards.
And by stack, you raised your finger, so you're talking in the area of a half inch to an inch. Is that about what you're looking at?
Yes, 10 plus cards.
Now, you then responded to this report of suspicious activity, correct?
Yes, I did.
And what did you find when you responded to the scene?
A person at the ATM utilizing several cards.
Now, when you found a person, was it a male or female?
Male.
And what did you do when you arrived and you saw this male with these cards, trying to do card after card?
Approached that person, identified myself, and explained my reason for the approach.
And what, if anything, did you ask that individual to do at that point in time?
Provide identification.
Did you ask him to do anything else with the ATM cards?
I did review them, yes.
Now, you said you asked the individual to identify himself.
Yes.
Did he produce an identification card or driver's license at that time?
Verbally,
Okay, so he didn't produce an ID card, but he told you who he was.
yes.
Now, you said you also looked at the ATM cards, the stack of ATM cards that he had, is that correct?
Yes.
And what was your purpose in looking at those ATM cards?
To confirm the names that were on them, to see if they were his or other names.
Now, with this stack of ATM cards, did the name that he gave you match the name on these ATM cards?
Yes.
Now, you stated that he didn't provide you with an identification card, is that correct?
That's correct.
But he did provide you with a name.
Yes.
Well, what did you do when he provided you with a name? How could you check that out?
Immediately went to the patrol car, utilized the computer system to run the name for any wants or warrants, and as well to pull up any identification via the driver's license database or ID card database.
Now, in this instance, when you ran the name through the database, through the computer, did you come up with, did it match the name he gave you? Did you find information?
Yes.
Now, do you recall whether the identification that you saw on the computer, was that a Florida ID card, or was it a driver's license, or something else?
I believe it was just a Florida ID card.
Now, did this identification information, under the name that the individual gave you at this time, did that provide you with an address?
It did on the ID information, yes.
On the ID that you looked on the screen,
Yes,
it
sir.
gave you an address?
Yes.
Do you recall that address?
Not off the top of my head.
Would reference to your report refresh your recollection as to that?
Yes.
I'll show you what's been marked as state's exhibits. There's 1 through 8 here, and I'd like you to specifically direct your attention to exhibit number 6. Would you take a moment and review that document, please?
Okay.
Okay, now, do you recognize that document?
I do.
And do you recognize that document to be a copy of that street check or field interview report that we were talking about at the beginning of this questioning?
Yes, sir.
Does that appear to be an accurate copy of your report?
Yes.
And would reference to that report refresh your recollection as to various information about this encounter?
Yes.
Now, looking at that report, do you recall what the address was that was recorded on the individual's identification that came up on your computer information?
Yes, the one that showed on the identification card was 4 Redwood Lane in McClinney, Florida.
Okay, were you able to obtain a date of birth?
Yes.
And what was the date of birth you identified?
February 21st, 1946.
Now, while you were able to obtain this residence information from McElhenney, is that how you say it?
McElhenney?
McElhenney, Florida.
Yeah.
Okay. While you were able to obtain that Florida address from this information, the identification information in the computer, did you ask the individual where he lived, what his address was?
I asked verbally, yes.
What did he tell you?
He stated actually that he had several residences and that the primary one was the Redwood Lane in McClinney, Florida.
But he stated he had many addresses, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, in performing your duties at that time as a patrol officer, did you have frequent contact with individuals as a result of what might be construed as suspicious activity?
Plenty.
And in your dealing with those kinds of individuals, as to this individual you were talking to this day, on February 21st, would you classify that particular person's attitude as cooperative with your efforts to obtain information?
Less than agreeable, less than cooperative.
What kind of instance would you point to that would say that he was being less than cooperative at that point in time?
Just the general demeanor. When I ask questions regarding, it's a standard question for us to ask on a street check for their next of kin information. In the event that something happens to them, we would know who to contact based on our records. And he just flat out did not want to give me any information regarding himself.
Now, you stated that when you verbally asked the individual for his address, that he told you he had many addresses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did he then provide you with any other address other than what was on the...
He verbally provided a local address.
What was the address that he provided you with?
1626 East 17th Avenue in Tampa.
Now, do you know what that area of Tampa is? Is it a suburb? What is it called?
It's a part of town. It's a neighborhood that's called Ybor City.
Did the person tell you what his occupation was at that time?
Yes, and I documented it.
What did he tell you?
Director of Development.
Did the person tell you who he was the director of development for?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
U.S. Navy Veterans Association.
And did he give you an address for that Veterans Association?
Yes.
What was the address he gave you?
7028 West Waters Avenue in Tampa, number 325.
Well, did the person bother to tell you that that business address he was giving you was nothing more than a UPS mailbox number, 325? Did he tell you that?
No.
Now, did you record a general description of the person you interviewed that day?
Yes, we did.
What did you identify him as, or describe him as?
A white male, 5'10", 180, brown hair, brown eyes, and the hair being a long, straight ponytail.
Did the person have a name?
Verbally provided a name, yes.
What was the name he gave you?
He gave me Bobby Charles Thompson.
Now, how is it you recall this particular encounter with this individual who identified himself to you as Bobby Thompson?
It sticks out in my head because of the level displayed of not wanting to provide answers, not being completely cooperative.
Overrule.
Go ahead.
Nope.
Go ahead, man.
Again, of not wanting to provide the information that we ask, not appearing to be cooperative with our questioning.
Did the fact of the stack of ATMs play into that?
Extremely.
Was that something that was commonplace?
I've never had that situation.
So you didn't have it before that, you didn't have it after that?
Never.
Now, how long would you say this encounter actually lasted?
10 to 15 minutes?
Well, in 10 to 15 minutes, I'd like you to take a moment and look at the defendant here. Study his face. Now, do you recognize this individual at all?
No.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Sure.
Nothing further for this witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any cross?
Yeah, yes, Your Honor. What obligation does anyone have to tell you who their next of kin are?
None.
So he did nothing illegal.
No.
And in the situation he was at, was he going to get shot? Was he going to get mugged? Why would he need to provide the next of kin?
Because it's standard questioning on our part.
How many cards did you say he had?
I would say in excess of 10.
Let me know when I'm doing something illegal or suspicious.
Objection, Your Honor.
Is there a question before the witness, please?
I was asking, Your Honor, I have over 10 cards myself. Does that make me a suspect in a crime?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
No, it doesn't.
Now, if you were to, approach me, I'm wearing a suit, I've got a tie on, and I'm at the ATM, and these all have my name on them. Is there anything criminal if I can't get a card to work?
Nope.
In fact, nothing criminal happened here because you didn't make an arrest, did you?
Correct.
And you can't even say for any amount of certainty that my client is the person you encountered that day.
Other than records, no, I don't remember him personally. A long time has elapsed.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect?
Nothing for the state, Your Honor.
All right, officer, thanks so much for coming in. Enjoy your trip home.
Thanks.
Call your next witness, please.
Alan McMurray.
See, actually, I just thought of it. She's from Tampa. The Rays beat the Tribe.
Your Honor, you're not supposed to be prejudicing the jury. They are losing to the Boston Red Sox, if that makes
Yeah.
an Indian fan feel better.
Should have asked her if she was a baseball fan, right? How'd the Cubs do anyways?
Same as always.
Always next year, right?
Yeah.
New ma'am, come on up. And if you kind of have to raise your right hand, You solemnly swear that you'll testify to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in this case, now and hearing, as you shall answer unto God.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Have a seat. The chair doesn't move, but the microphone does up and down. Tomorrow, your witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, would you state your full name and spell your last name for the court reporter?
Helen Marie McMurray, MacMurray.
Ma'am, are you currently employed?
Yes, I am.
Who do you work for?
McMurray, Peterson and Schuster, LLP.
And what are you employed as?
I'm an attorney.
Now, so McMurray, Peterson, and Schuster, that's the name of your law firm?
Yes.
Where are the offices of your law firm located?
6530 West Campus Oval in New Albany, Ohio.
And approximately how many years have you run or operated your own law firm?
6.5 years.
What if any area of law do you concentrate your legal practice on?
I have focused my practice in the area of consumer protection and charitable regulations.
Now, where were you working before you started your own law firm?
I worked at the Ohio Attorney General's office.
Where did you work before that?
I worked at a law firm called Thompson, Hein & Flory in Columbus, Ohio.
And when you said you worked at the Attorney General's office, where were your offices located at that point in time?
They were also located in Columbus, Ohio.
Now, what was your job when you were with the Ohio Attorney General's office?
I was chief of the Consumer Protection Section.
And how long you were the chief of the Consumer Protection Division?
I was chief there for 6 years.
Now, you also stated that you practiced law, and I think it was before that or after that with Thompson Hein.
It was before that.
And is that a law firm as well?
Yes, it is.
Was that also located in Columbus?
It was also.
And how many years were you with Thompson Hein?
Approximately 3 years.
Where were you employed before you started with Thompson Hein?
I was at Squire, Sanders, and Dempsey of Columbus, Ohio.
And that's also a law firm?
Yes, it is.
And how long were you with Squires?
I was there for approximately 5 years.
Okay, so we're working our way back. Was that the first firm you worked for when you graduated from law school?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to that. Where did you graduate from law school?
At the University of Toledo College of Law here in Ohio.
And when did you obtain your law degree from the University of Toledo?
That was in 1987.
Okay, now with your experience in dealing with governmental regulatory bodies, you've identified that you concentrate your practice now in a specific area or areas, is that correct?
Yes, it
And
is.
what were those areas?
Consumer protection, defense, and charitable regulatory area.
Now, in the course of your legal practice, did you have contact with an enterprise called the United States Navy Veterans Association, what you'll hear me call the USNVA, and or an individual using the name Bobby Thompson?
Yes, I did.
What was that contact initially?
Initially, my law firm was contacted to represent the USNVA in a couple of different matters.
Would that be in the charitable regulatory arena?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, ma'am, I'm going to ask you to look at, I'm going to hand you these exhibits. I'm going to ask you to look at what's been marked as Exhibit 4. Take a moment and look at that document, please. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that exhibit to be?
This is what we call an engagement letter or a retainer letter between my law firm and the Navy Vets Association.
Okay, an engagement letter or retainer letter. In what I guess you'd say layman's terms, or for somebody that's not a lawyer, what does that mean? What is an engagement or retainer letter?
It's basically a writing between the parties where we agree on what the terms will be, what the hourly rates will be, and what type of representation the firm will provide to the client.
So it's in effect a contract or an agreement between your firm and the person that you're going to be representing, correct?
Yes, right.
Now, is that document, as you're looking at Exhibit 4, a document that would be retained in your business files at your law firm in the regular course of business?
Yes, it is.
And does that document itself appear to be a true and accurate copy of the original of that document that had been located in your and retained in your firm's files?
Yes, it is.
When is that engagement letter first dated?
The typewritten date is October 2nd of 2007.
Is the letter signed on behalf of what was called the USNDA?
Yes, it is.
Do you recognize the signature of the person signing the letter as the USNDA?
Yes, I do.
And whose signature do you recognize on that letter?
The man that I knew is Bobby Thompson.
Now, what date did the person using the name Bobby Thompson sign that engagement letter?
It is signed October 4th of 2007.
Well, when approximately did your firm actually terminate the representation of the United States Navy Veterans Association?
Approximately July of 2010.
Were there any other engagement letters that covered your firm's representation of the USNDA in that time, that 3-some-odd years time frame?
Yes.
Please turn to what's been marked as Exhibit 5. And take a moment and review that document, please, ma'am. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that document to be?
It is a second engagement or retainer letter between my law firm and the Navy Veterans Association.
Is that also a document that was kept in your business files at your law firm in the regular course of business?
Yes, we did.
And again, does that document itself appear to be in substantially the same condition or a true and accurate copy of the original event document that was retained in your firm's file?
Yes, it is.
Now, when is that engagement letter dated?
The typewritten date
Using the name Bobby Thompson actually signed that engagement letter.
the handwritten date is May 31st of 2009.
Now, when you began this representation, who exactly was the client?
The United States Navy Veterans Association and its various state chapters.
So it's the organization.
Absolutely.
Now, what was your understanding as to what kind of business organization or enterprise the USNDA was supposed to be when you were retained to represent that organization?
It was what we call a nonprofit or a charitable organization designed to benefit veterans.
How did you get that understanding?
The man I knew was Bobby Thompson. He told me.
Now, you stated that you recognized the signature on these engagement letters as being the signature of the person you knew as Bobby Thompson, correct? Now, prior to having these engagement letters signed, did you have discussions with anyone from the USNDA about the fact that an engagement letter, this written agreement, was necessary before your firm and you could start representing the USNDA?
Yes, I did.
Well, in general, what did those discussions consist of?
The discussions basically were the types of issues that the association was having and whether or not our firm had handled those kind of issues and if we would represent them in issues that would come up going forward.
Did you talk about the hourly rate that would be charged for the legal services you were being asked to provide for this association?
Absolutely. We always discuss the rate and how that will be charged and any other questions that the client may have.
Did you discuss the types of legal services that you could provide to the association?
Absolutely. We explained the types of regulatory work that we did in the various states that we had worked in and the type of work that we had done that was similar to what the association might need.
And who from the United States Navy Veterans Association did you have those discussions with?
The man I knew was Bobby Thompson.
Did you ever have discussions concerning the terms of the representation, things like the fees that were going to be charged, or the scope of the representation, or anything else for that matter, with any person other than the person using the name Bobby Thompson before these engagement letters were signed? And I'm talking about people from the USNDA.
No, never.
Now, in looking at these two engagement letters, the two engagement letters are dated actually as the actual date on the two letters is a date before the signature of the person using the name Bobby Thompson. On one, the letter, the last one, it's dated, type dated, March 3rd of 2009, and the letter itself is signed with the name Bobby Thompson on 5/31/09. The other one, the first one, is dated October 2 of 2007, but yet the signature of the name Bobby Thompson is 10/4/07. With that difference in the date, what was the procedure that was used for obtaining the signatures on this agreement?
It's typical for there to be negotiation back and forth, sometimes between the client and our firm in terms of what the service will be. Sometimes the client just takes a while to sign it. With regards to the 2009 letter, the types of services that we were providing was actually different, and so it was going to take effect when the previous general counsel had left, and then starting June 1st, this new letter would be effective.
Now, with this signing procedure where you sent the letter to the client, did you discuss that procedure, that this letter was going to be drafted up and then it was going to be sent to be signed and then sent back to you?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, who did you discuss that with?
The man I knew is Bobby Thompson.
Did you talk about that procedure and what was required with any other person supposedly representing the US NBA other than the person you knew as Bobby Thompson?
No, never.
Well now, was there any kind of discussion with the person using the name Bobby Thompson that you and your firm could not provide legal representation to this association until there was an agreement in place or an understanding as to the terms of representation?
Yes, with regards to the long-term representation, we would have to have a signed letter. Now, sometimes we would take phone calls and look at things on a preliminary basis before the actual signature was on and received.
Now, after these engagement letters were actually in place, did you and your firm then proceed to provide legal services to the United States Navy Veterans Association?
Yes, we did.
Now, after those engagement letters were in place, after they were signed off with the name Bobby Thompson, did you have any conversations with the person using the name Bobby Thompson where he identified to you that he had not, in fact, signed any letters of agreement or any engagement letters that covered the terms of the rates and the legal services that your firm was going to provide for this association?
Never.
Well, how many times did the person using the name Bobby Thompson in the 3 years then afterwards that you represented the association, how many times did this person using the name Bobby Thompson make any statement that he had never signed any kind of engagement letter or retainer letter with your firm?
Never.
How many times did that person who used the name Bobby Thompson tell you or make a statement to you that somebody had forged his name, that somebody else had signed his name to these documents?
Never.
Did you actually meet? Okay, you're talking about this was a male-to-male type of, meaning U.S. mail to U.S. mail type of arrangement. Did you actually physically meet the person using the name Bobby Thompson?
Yes, I did.
First, approximately how many times would you say you actually met him in person?
Probably 5 or 6 different times.
Now, in those 5 or 6 different times, did the length of the meetings, let's say, change?
Yes.
How, from short ones to long ones, what did that kind of run?
Probably from a couple of hours to meetings over a couple of days.
And what was the first time? How did you first come to physically actually meet the person using the name Bobby Thompson?
I was at the Space Needle in Seattle, and I was at a fundraiser for the Attorney General, and a gentleman walked up to me and asked if I was the Helen McMurray from New Albany, Ohio, and I said yes, and he said, well, I'm your client, Bobby Thompson, and I'm the U.S. Navy Veterans Association.
Now, when he said your client, did you at any point in time, now you said, and the United States Navy Veterans Association, correct?
Yes, he did.
Now, let's go first. What specifically did the person you know as Bobby Thompson tell you when you met you this time? What did he specifically tell you his name was?
He indicated that he was Commander Bobby Thompson.
Now, you stated that he said, well, I'm your client, Bobby Thompson, and the US NBA. Did you or your firm ever represent the person using the name Bobby Thompson in his individual capacity versus representing the association, the USNDA?
My firm never represented the individual known to me as Bobby Thompson. We only represented the association and the state chapters.
Now, did you ever have any discussions with the person using the name Bobby Thompson about whether you and your firm actually represented him or represented the association? Was there ever any kind of effort made to eliminate a potential for confusion in that area?
Yes.
How did those conversations ever come up?
There were, I think, a couple of instances where potentially conduct of the man I knew as Bobby Thompson could have been either criminal or a civil case against him personally. And I specifically advised him that my client, my firm's client, is the association and the state chapters, and that if he had concerns about his own individual conduct, then he needed to obtain representation himself, and I would encourage him to do that if he felt that it was necessary.
Now, you said these kinds of situations came up. Was there anything, one in particular, that raised this kind of potential where you had to sit down and you had to make sure that the person using the name Bobby Thompson fully understood that you did not represent him and your firm didn't represent him, that you represented what was called the association?
One occasion that comes to mind is when the newspaper reporter Jeff Testerman raised questions with regards to somebody else voting under the name of Mr. Mader. And knowing that election fraud can be a criminal or civil offense, and that it was a person who voted in Florida where this Bobby Thompson was located, I advised him that if there were any truth to these allegations, that again, my firm did not represent him in that matter, and that he would have to get his own counsel to represent himself individually if he felt that that was legitimate and a concern.
Now, to your knowledge, was there ever, you made this discussion with him, and your role was as general counsel for the USNBA, correct?
After June 1st of 2009 it was, yes.
Okay. So before that, would you be classified with your representation as like special counsel or something?
Yes, that's fair.
Okay. Now, you made reference about this incident that was raised by the reporter named Testerman.
Yes.
About this mayor. Now, to your knowledge as the representative of the association, the legal counsel for the association, after you had this conversation with the person using the name Bobby Thompson, were you required, or to your knowledge, was there ever any kind of criminal charges brought, or was it ever necessary for that individual to actually go out and get a criminal defense attorney to represent him in that matter?
From my understanding, the man I knew as Bobby Thompson did not obtain his own counsel on that issue.
And there were no charges filed by the state of Florida concerning that, is that correct?
Not that I was aware of, no.
Now, in the course of your, I'm sorry.
Okay.
In the course of your representation, ma'am, of the USNBA, did the person that you had contact with, this person using the name Bobby Thompson, did he explain to you, in general, what I'm talking about, how this organization, or how this enterprise was set up, how it was to function?
Yes, he did.
What did he tell you?
He explained that it was a national association and that it had been created in order to benefit Navy veterans and other veterans as well throughout the United States. It was run by a board of directors, and then there were also about 40 or 41 state chapters, and then each of those state chapters would raise money within each individual state. And they were set up under the IRS nonprofit laws, and they were required to keep records of their expenses to establish that they were used on behalf of veterans.
Now, you stated that this is what he explained to you. What was the, oh, I'm sorry. What was the,
Thank you.
you said it was a nonprofit, correct?
Yes.
What was the IRS tax code exemption that was applicable, or what was this called?
The code section is 501C19. The 19 means it's for veterans.
Now, you made a reference stating that documentation was required to show that the money was used for the benefit of veterans, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, are you familiar with the term cradle to grave?
Yeah.
Okay. It's used for a lot of different things, right?
Yes.
And looking at the type of documentation that's required with 501c19, would it properly be characterized as cradle to grave? When the money comes in, it has to be documented how much money comes in and how that money is spent. From the dimes that come in to the dimes that go out. From cradle to grave, it has to be documented. Is that an accurate statement?
If you want to maintain your exemption as nonprofit and tax-free under the IRS code, yes, you have to maintain those complete records, even whether you're audited or not. You have to keep those records showing it as it comes in and then how it's being spent. Again, being able to verify that you are spending that money on veterans' appropriate activities.
Now, we see that your representation of the USNBA began, if we looked at your first letter, it was dated October 2nd. It was signed by the person using the name Bobby Thompson on October 4th of 2007. And you stated it went until approximately June or July of 2010, is that correct?
Yes.
So in that about 3+ years, or right around 3-year time frame, that you represented this association called the USNBA, who was your point of contact with that enterprise?
The man I knew was Bobby Thompson.
At this point, I'm going to ask you to look at what's been marked as States Exhibit 69. Now, specifically, I'd like you to look at an item in that exhibit, and the item is identified as item 33.
Okay, I've got it.
Okay, now, I should have said this at the beginning, but States Exhibit 69 is identified as known handwriting sample B, correct? If you just look at the very front of the exhibit.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Now, looking at item 33, do you recognize what that document is?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize it to be?
It is another version of the 2009 retainer letter between my law firm and the Navy Vets Association.
And that's the document, what's the date on that one?
March 3rd, 2009.
So that would be the second retainer letter.
Correct.
And you did identify, I believe, what did you identify? It has a couple of blacked out areas in it, correct?
Yeah, this one's a little bit different in that there is something called redactions, 2 blacked out phrases.
And what was redacted out of that one?
I believe it was our actual hourly rate that we charged at that time.
So that would have been, that's not redacted in the ones we just looked at in exhibits 3 and 4, correct?
Correct, they are in those exhibits 3 and exhibit 4.
Now, with the exception of those blacked out areas, is this document in fact a true and accurate copy of the original one, the copy that we just looked at?
Yes.
Now, in your personal meetings, you had several of these meetings, and you said the first one that you met the defendant was in Seattle, I believe?
Yes.
When you had these other meetings with the defendant, you said they went anywhere from a couple of hours to several days, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you ever have the opportunity to see him actually taking notes or signing his name or writing something?
Absolutely.
Did you become familiar with his handwriting or his printing, let's say, handwriting and or printing, and or what his signature actually looks like?
Absolutely.
I'd like you to now look at item 32 on that exhibit. Now, do you recognize that as a document you and your law firm provided to the state of Ohio in the course of this investigation?
Yes, I did. We did.
And does that document appear to be in substantially the same condition as when you provided it in the course of this investigation?
Yes, except you've added your state exhibit number on the bottom.
Okay, it says McMurray Exhibit number 67, correct?
Yes.
Now, do you recognize the handwriting that these notes are made in?
Absolutely.
Whose handwriting do you recognize that to be?
This is the handwriting of the man that I knew as Bobby Thompson.
Now, this particular document, do you recall the events that led you to become familiar with the contents of this particular document?
Yes, there was a reporter in St. Petersburg who was writing a series of articles alleging that the Navy Vets Association was a scam organization. And he sent the association through me dozens and dozens of questions. And the man I knew as Bobby Thompson would respond to them in this type of handwriting and fax them to me or mail them to me in volume, in large volume.
Now, when you say that he would respond, the person you knew as Bobby Thompson would respond, when you communicated these questions, you were receiving the questions from the reporter named Testerman?
Yes, I did.
And who would you provide those questions to from the USNBA?
To the man I knew as Bobby Thompson.
Did you provide them in order to, for what reason, when you give him the question? What was the reason you gave him the question?
Because he was the only contact I had for the Navy Veterans Association.
Did you obtain information as to what was supposed to be put in an answer to any of these questions from anybody other than the person using the name Bobby Thompson?
No.
Would you discuss the answers that were to be put in these, to put into the response to Mr. Testerman? Did you discuss those answers, what was going to be in there, with anybody that was, let's say, a member, or let's say a director or officer or trustee from the United States Navy Veterans Association, other than the individual using the name Bobby Thompson?
I did not, no.
Okay, ma'am, I'd like you to look at what's been marked as States Exhibit 66. Now that document, the exhibit itself, is identified as known handwriting sample C, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, now looking at that, I'd like you to look at the section of that exhibit. There's a section tab, V. Thompson. Do you see where I'm looking?
Yes, I do.
Okay, now when you find that section, I'd like you to find the item in that section that's identified as U, the letter U. And I'd like you to take a moment when you find that to review item U.
Single letter U?
Single letter U, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. Now that document itself is a handwritten note, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Now from the contents of that note, do you recognize who that handwritten note is to?
Yes, I do.
Who's it to?
It's to me.
Now the note itself is printed and then there's a signature at the bottom of that note, correct?
Yes, there is.
So you see where I'm looking on the note?
I do, yes.
Now the signature just simply says, "Thanks, Bobby," correct?
Yes, that's right.
Now let's look first at the printing on the body of this note. Do you recognize whose printing this is?
Probably. I mean, it looks kind of like one of the assistants volunteers there, but I'm not sure.
Okay, but you don't recognize the printing as that of the person you knew as Bobby Thompson.
That was not Bobby Thompson's printing, no.
Okay? Now, let's look at that little bit of a signature that's there, where it says, "Thanks, Bobby." Now, that signature is written in script, as opposed to the printing above it, correct?
Yes, it is.
Do you recognize the handwritten writing of that signature?
I certainly do.
Now, whose handwriting do you recognize that signature to be?
I recognize it to be the handwriting of the man I knew as Bobby Thompson.
Okay, now I'd like you to look at item V.
Okay.
Now, on this item, there's a series of printing and numbers on it, correct?
Yes.
Now, do you recognize on this one whose printing appears on this document?
Yes, I do.
Whose printing do you recognize that to be?
I recognize it to be the man I knew as Bobby Thompson.
Okay, now I'd like you to look at item Z, as in tool.
Okay.
Now, with this document, it's a copy of a couple receipts, and then there's some printing again on this document.
Yes.
Now, with this one, item Z, again, do you recognize the printing that appears on this page?
Some of it, yes.
Okay. Now, there's at the top, it says Walmart Waterbury. Is that the printing you recognize or not?
No, no.
Okay, now the next one is a dollar sign, 2001.36 MISC. Is that the last of the printing?
Yes.
Is that in fact the printing that you recognize, the handwriting of this?
Certainly the numbers of that I recognize as the man I knew as Bobby Thompson.
Okay. Now I'd like you to turn to item AA, double A.
Okay.
Now, again, this item consists of some copies, a copy of a receipt, and then there's some printing and some numbers on the page, correct?
Yes.
Now, do you recognize whose printing appears on this page?
Yes.
And whose printing or handwriting do you recognize that to be?
The Walmart New Haven $93 I recognize to be the printing of the man I knew as Bobby Thompson.
Okay, now I'd like you to turn to item BB, double B,
As in boy.
as in boy.
Got it.
Now, on this document, there's a signature in the middle of the page, correct?
Yes.
And do you recognize that signature?
Yes, I do.
And whose signature do you recognize that to be?
Again, that's the signature of the man I knew as Bobby Thompson.
And in fact, the name that's signed there is the name Bobby Thompson, correct?
Yes, it is.
Now let's look at item FF.
Okay.
Now with item FF, that item again contains, it's a standard looking typed document, but then in the middle there's some printing. It's a dollar sign, 529 plan, CXI, charged, GPB, and then there's some struck through information and a phone number. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, do you recognize the printing, again, that appears on this page?
Yes, I do.
And whose printing do you recognize that to be?
I recognize it to be the printing of the man I knew as Bobby Thompson.
Now I'd like you to turn to item OO, double O.
I got it.
Now with item OO, this again is a handwritten note, correct?
Yes.
Now as opposed to the other items that we've looked at that had printing in the handwritten area, this one's actually written in script, correct?
Yes, it is, except for the top line.
Except for the very top line, which is again printed, where it says Hawaii A6 civil action, correct?
Hawaii AG.
AG, I'm sorry,
Yes.
HG, A6.
Yeah.
Now, with this one, when we're referring to whether it's the printing or whether it's the handwritten part, do you recognize the handwriting on this page?
Yes, I do.
And whose handwriting do you recognize that to be?
I recognize it to be the handwriting of the man that I knew as Bobby Thompson.
Hey, ma'am, I'm going to ask you to look at what's been marked as Exhibit 68. Now, ma'am, with this one, it's identified as known samples A, correct?
Yes.
Now, specifically in looking at Exhibit 68, I would like you to look at the first document that's in this exhibit. And if you look at this first document, it's titled, at the top left side of the page, it states, handwriting specimens of. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, now, the next line of that document has a name, correct?
yes, it does.
And what's the name that's identified that this is a handwriting specimen of?
Either Bobby L. or Bobby C. Thompson.
Now, looking at the top right-hand corner of this handwriting sample, it indicates that the sample was taken, it was witnessed on September 27th of 2012. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I'd like you to take a couple moments, because this is a multi-page document. I'd like you to take a couple moments and actually look through the contents of that handwriting specimen that was given by Bobby C. Thompson on September 27th of 2012.
Okay.
Now, after looking through that handwriting sample, in the 3 some odd years that you represented the United States Navy Veterans Association, and in all the documentary materials you received from the person using the name Bobby Thompson, and all the handwriting, whether it be printed or whether it be script, did you ever receive or did you ever see any documentation of any kind involving this person using the name Bobby Thompson with writing, printing, or signatures that even remotely resembled what was provided in this handwriting specimen of September 29th, 2012, or
No.
27th of 2012?
Never.
Ma'am, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 40. And I'll bring that one up first because it's the biggest and heaviest. Okay, and I'm also going to show you what's been marked as Exhibits 53 and 55. I'd like you to take a moment and make sure you're familiar with these documents, that you've seen them before.
Yes, these generally, obviously they're hundreds of pages, generally look like the checks that I have previously reviewed, yes.
Okay. Now, you stated you previously reviewed those before you came here to testify, correct?
Yes,
Now, the purpose of your review was to have you identify whether or not, with the checks that are identified in that exhibit, those exhibits, whether or not you could recognize any of the signatures on those checks, correct?
yes.
Okay, first I'd like to refer to Exhibit 40, which is identified as Thompson checks.
Did you say 40?
40, it's the big one. Now that exhibit itself contains checks from various bank accounts written to the name of Bobby Thompson or cash. Now, in general, were you able to make a determination as far as the authorizing signature on these checks that are identified in the index in that exhibit?
Yes.
Now, what was the determination you made as to the, and by the authorizing signature, what we're talking about is the signature on the front of the checks,
Yes.
the person that signed off on the check. What were you able to determine, or what did you determine as far as whether you could recognize that signature?
In reviewing every single one of these checks, I either recognized the signature of the man I knew as Bobby Thompson, or he had one of those rubber stamps made up that also bore his signature, and I also recognized that as the signature of the man I knew as Bobby Thompson.
So you could tell that there was two types of, there's two types of signatures on these documents, correct? The check is either one that's signed in the name of Bobby Thompson, or it's a check that has a stamp of the name Bobby Thompson.
Yes.
And if it had the stamp, or I just want to be clear, is what you're saying that you recognize the signature in the stamp as being the signature of the person you knew as Bobby Thompson as well?
Yes, even though it obviously wasn't the original, it was clearly the signature of the man that I knew as Bobby Thompson.
Okay, now I'd like you to look, let me get that out of your way. Let me get 40 out of your way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like you to look at Exhibit 53, and I believe that one's titled Contreras Checks, correct?
Yes.
Now again, this exhibit contains checks from various bank accounts that were written to the name of Blanca Contreras or to cash, correct?
Yes.
Now when you reviewed this, were you able to make a determination on these checks as to, again, the authorizing signature on the checks, as to whether or not you could recognize the signature of the person who apparently signed these checks?
Yes.
And what did you determine?
That for most every signature, I identified it as either the original signature that I knew of Bobby Thompson, or the stamp that again bore his signature of the man I knew as Bobby Thompson. There may have been one or two that were illegible or kind of blank, but 99.9% I recognized. Yes.
Now, I'd like you now to look at 55. Now that document, that exhibit is entitled Reuben Checks, correct?
Yes, it is.
Now with the Reuben checks, again, that exhibit contains checks from various bank accounts that were written to the name of Carmika Reuben or to cash, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now again, in examining the authorizing signature on those checks, were you able to make a determination as to who you recognized or whether you recognized the signature on those checks?
Yes.
And what did you determine?
I determined that all of the signatures in this document were the signature that I recognized as Bobby Thompson.
Okay, let me retrieve this from you. Now, ma'am, you're an attorney, correct?
Yes.
You are not certified or qualified as a handwriting expert, correct?
No, I'm not.
And your determination that these signatures you recognize as the signature of the person you knew as Bobby Thompson, those are based upon your review or your understanding of the information that was provided to you by the defendant, his handwriting that you saw, correct?
Yes, he was one of those clients that faxed things with original handwriting, that wrote notes constantly, and not until the very end used email quite a bit. So I looked at tons and tons of paper he would send me in that very difficult to read signature, which I became very, very familiar with.
Now, in the 3+ years you represented the USNDA, and your point of contact you identified was the person using the name as Bobby Thompson, correct?
Yes.
How many conversations did you have with that person who used the name Bobby Thompson, where he indicated to you, first as the special counsel, let's say, for the USNDA, and then later as the general counsel for the USNDA, that somebody unknown to him was stealing money out of the accounts from the USNDA?
Never once.
Well, how many discussions did you have with the individual using the name Bobby Thompson, where he indicated to you, again as the special counsel for the association or the general counsel later, that somebody else was signing his name to checks, or without authorization, taking a stamp of his name and stamping it on checks and taking money out of the accounts of the United States Navy Veterans Association?
Never once.
Well, how many times did you have conversations, or how many conversations did you have, I should ask, with the person using the name Bobby Thompson, where he told you that somebody was using ATM cards without his authorization to siphon money out of accounts that held Ohio money or any money from the USMDA for that matter?
Never once.
Did, in the 3 years that you represented the USMDA, did the defendant ever indicate that there was one other person, whether it be Blanca Contreras or be Carnica Rubin or anybody, did anybody have the authority to use an ATM card or to write checks without his direct and specific authorization?
Never once.
Now, as the general counsel for the association, in your discussions with the defendant, did you obtain an understanding of approximately how many members this association was supposed to have nationwide, let's say?
Yes.
What was your understanding?
I understood to have over 60,000 members nationwide.
Now, did each state, now it was supposedly operating or collecting money in anywhere from 40 to 41 or 42 states, correct?
Yes.
Did each state have what would be called its own individual state chapter that would go in and collect the money?
For those 40 plus states, yes.
Okay, so what was the role again of the, when you talk about the state chapters as opposed to the national association, because there were two entities, correct?
Yes.
Well, how did those two interact, if they did interact?
The state chapters were affiliates of the national chapter. However, they restricted the state chapters to raising money in their own states, and then they would expend it on veterans in their own states and have events and programs for veterans in their own state.
Now, you expressed the understanding that the association had what was supposed to be, or functioned, by collecting money in anywhere from 40 to 41 or so states, correct?
Yes.
The last time we looked, despite what some people say, there's 50 states in the United States, correct?
Yes.
Well, did the person using the name Bobby Thompson explain to you why the United States Navy Veterans Association did not try to collect money in all 50 states and stop short at like 40 to 41?
Yes, he did.
What did that individual tell you?
Each state has its own charitable regulations, and they're all different. And some states have very few regulations, and some states have lots of regulations. And some of those states also require actual financial audited finance statements or an audit. And the states in which the association did not have chapters, Bobby Thompson indicated to me it was primarily because of the fact that they required a financial audit and that the association did not want to provide that. And so they chose rather not to collect money or have a chapter in those particular states.
Now, there's nothing requiring any charity, much less a C-19 veterans organization, to actually go into every state and collect money, correct?
Not at all.
But from what you're saying, am I correct then, that the decision not to collect money in those 9 or 10 other states was solely based on the requirement that if money was collected, a financial audit was required to be submitted to the state?
That seemed to be the primary reason that Bobby Thompson stated to me, yes.
And that financial audit would have had to disclose the details of how much money was collected, correct?
Yes.
And how much money was taken out, what it was used for specifically, correct?
Yes.
Did he give you any other reason for not going into those extra states outside of the fact that he didn't really want to provide anybody with information as to what was coming in and what was specifically going out?
I mean, there may have been small things, but not to my recollection anything else.
Now, again, we have an organization that's set up that has a national part of the organization, a national body, and we have state chapters, correct?
Yes.
Did the defendant explain to you how the leadership structure was arranged of this supposed association with supposedly a national organization and state chapters?
Yes, he did.
What did he tell you?
He indicated that the National Association was run by a board of directors, and then each state chapter was led by a commander, and then a second in charge would be a deputy commander or something of that nature.
Now, ma'am, have you ever been in the military?
No, I haven't.
Was your understanding, when you're talking about a commander or deputy commander or something like that, was it your understanding that those were meant to be military ranks?
I think I thought that they were probably military ranks. I mean, most of my family is Navy. You know, commander seemed to be a term that made sense. I wasn't familiar specifically, though.
But in this instance, they were used solely as commander or deputy commander or
Yes.
something like that. They were used just to designate leader, number 2 leader.
Apparently so, yes.
Now, in your practice, in your legal practice of representing these charitable organizations or that have to go before these, that are regulated by all these states, and as you stated, each state's got different requirements. Is it common for the general counsel, your practice as a general counsel, to actually meet with the board of directors of the enterprise, something like the USNBA?
I represent a lot of different clients in a lot of different ways, and frequently I do meet with the board of directors, yes.
Now, when you were representing the USNBA, the association, how did you know when an issue arose in a state? How did you know whether you were going into that state to represent the national organization or the specific state organization with whatever regulatory matter was coming up in the state at that time?
Bobby Thompson would tell me.
Well, now, in the course of that 3 years that you represented the USNBA, both the national and state chapters, were you required to actually handle legal regulatory matters in different states?
Yes, I did.
And you state that when you went into the state, when you went into the particular state, that didn't come out right, did it? You state the state. But when you went into the state, you knew whether you were representing, the only way you knew whether you were going to represent the National Association versus the State Association was you had to get that direction from the individual you knew as Bobby Thompson.
Yes, Bobby Thompson always gave me specific instructions as to who my client was in that particular representation within each state that I would go into.
Well, as the general counsel, did you have any degree of freedom to decide, well, who you were going to be representing at that point in time, whether it was this, to make the determination, not to say who you were representing, but to determine on your own, as the general counsel, was it the national or the state?
Absolutely not. I mean, Bobby Thompson told me who my client would be for that event, for that particular investigation. And if I had a problem with that, I obviously would have discussed it with him. He gave me the instructions on every state, even after I became general counsel.
Now, again, in that 3+ years you represented the association, and I'm only going to refer to state chapters here, how many directors or officers of the 40 to 41 different state chapters did you actually meet as the general counsel?
Absolutely none.
Well, how many directors or officers of these state chapters, I'm talking about state chapters, did you actually talk to in that 3 years as the general counsel that would have to go into these states and represent their legal interests?
Absolutely none.
So you never met any, and you never talked to any?
No.
Well, how many, when you go into these different states, and you went into more than one other state, correct?
I went into many states, yes.
Okay, how many people did you meet that were supposedly members then? We'll go away from directors or officers or trustees, whatever they might call. How many actual members of this association, any state chapter, did you ever meet?
None.
Well, how many supposed members of the state chapters in 40 to 41 states did you then talk to in preparing your legal responses or legal papers revolving these actions in these states?
None.
Well, when you go into these states and you had to get the information to represent the interest, well, where would you get your information from if you weren't talking to an officer or director from that state, or you weren't talking to supposedly a member of this association from the state? Where did you get your information to even try to represent something in a legal fashion?
For this client, Bobby Thompson served in that role, and he purportedly talked to these people, obtained this information, and then he funneled it all through himself to me.
So if it was Florida, the person you would talk to with the information, the only person was Bobby Thompson.
Yes,
If it was Ohio, it was Bobby Thompson.
yes,
If it was Hawaii, it was Bobby Thompson.
yes,
If it was New Mexico, it was Bobby Thompson.
yes.
In every single instance, is that correct? He never put you in contact. He never had you talk to a single person other than him?
Every time I requested, every time I suggested, every time I recommended, he funneled everything back through him, and increasingly became less and less desirous of me talking to anybody. Every time I asked, it was never granted.
Now, again, with operating or collecting money in 40 to 41 different states, in your contact with this person using the name Bobby Thompson, what was your understanding then of how the money, who would go in and actually collect the money? Was it the person using the name Bobby Thompson? Did he make the phone calls to citizens, let's say in the state of Ohio, and say, hey, give us money?
No, he did not.
Well, what was your understanding of who actually did the work, who worked the phones?
In the charitable world, one of the ways to raise money is through companies called professional solicitors or professional fundraisers. And they are telemarketers, much like the kind of people that call you up to sell you things, but rather they call you up on behalf of a charity and ask you to donate money to the association.
Now, in the case of the United States Navy Veterans Association, in this functioning regardless across the nation, when you became the general counsel, how many professional fundraisers were being used?
My recollection was that there were 2 different companies being used by the association at that time.
Do you recall the names of those 2 companies?
They were CSI and another company called ACS.
Would CSI also be known as Community Support Incorporated?
Yes,
And ACS, would that be Associated Community Services, Inc.?
yes it was.
Now, what was the relationship? Was it a business relationship between the USNVA and the professional fundraisers, or what? How did they function?
My understanding is that the professional fundraisers had a written contract with either the National Association to raise money on behalf of the National Association, or they had a written contract with each of the state chapters that they were raising money for, and that they had accounts associated with each state and then one for the national.
Okay, I'd like to direct your attention now to June 7th of 2010. Did you meet with representatives of either of those 2 professional fundraisers that acted as agents for the United States Navy Veterans Association in collecting that money?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yes, I'd like to direct your attention to June 7th through the 10th of 2010. Did you have an occasion to meet with any representatives that were professional fundraisers that were the ones that actually collected money for the USNVA?
On approximately those dates, yes, I did.
And who did you meet with? What professional fundraising company?
It was the ACS company.
Now, who was the individual, as you recall, that was, I guess, the president or owner of ACS?
My recollection is that we met with Dick Cole of ACS at that meeting.
And he was he the president?
He was my main contact there. I assumed he was.
Okay. Now, where did that meeting in June of 2010 actually take place?
New York City.
Who attended that meeting on, let's say, behalf of the fundraiser?
It was Dick Cole and his charitable solicitation counsel.
And by charitable solicitation counsel, what you mean is the lawyer for his company?
Yes.
Okay. Now, who attended the meeting on behalf of the USNVA?
I was there. The man I knew as Bobby Thompson was there. Carmika Rubin was there. And O'Daniel, Mr. O'Daniel.
And that would be Tom O'Daniel?
Tom O'Daniel was also there.
Now, who actually set up that meeting?
Bobby Thompson's at the meeting.
Now, Bobby Thompson, was he the one who told you about the meeting?
Yes, he did.
As the general counsel for the USNDA, did you have then discussions with the person you knew as Bobby Thompson?